Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Lex Out Loud, world building for science fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. I'm working on my third novel, my first science fiction novel, and I'm taking you along with me for the ride. In season 1, I'm exploring world building in depth. So on the show so far, I've talked quite a bit about the overall setting for the books that I'm working on. And lately, I've been working more on zeroing in on the specific setting that I'll use for the first book. So, I've been working on the setting of the solar system overall, just trying to get a big picture idea of where do humans have settlements in the solar system? How many of those are there? What do they look like? What kind of populations do they have? Things like that. And we've got a lot of that fleshed out, a lot of that kind of big picture, the entire world kind of thing. Although I guess world doesn't really work so well with this, the entire solar system. So now that I've got a pretty good grasp of what all that looks like, now I'm thinking more about the specific location and locations where the first story is going to take place. And so that's what I'm going to talk more about today, where I'm at in the world building and my ideas for the specific cylinder habitat that will be the stage or the setting for the first story. So really excited to talk about that. It is exciting as all this kind of big picture stuff is, and it is super exciting, the future Earth history and all the stuff we've been talking about on the show so far. There's something about the immediacy of starting to work on the specific place where the story is going to begin that's very exciting, makes it feel like, this is something that's much more imminent, much more on the horizon than it was. So I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else or not, but yeah, I'm getting really excited about things, more and more excited all the time. And a lot of this comes from kind of a Eureka moment I had while discussing this with my wife a few weeks ago, which, if I can just tangent here for a moment, I know everybody's different and everybody's creative process is different. But at least for me personally, I find that sometimes I have some of the best ideas for my books or even my RPG adventures, whatever I'm working on, when I'm talking about them with other people, with my wife, it's mostly with my wife these days. And like I said, we're all different, different people process in different ways. But for me, yeah, and not just my best ideas, like just some idea that comes out of nowhere, but more, I'm talking the ideas that bring other ideas together. So I think I've talked before on the show about the idea of the strange attractor, which is where you have one or a few things as far as ideas about your story or your setting or a character or whatever. And you have a few of these ideas that kind of, they fit together and everything in a way that you would expect. And then you combine that with some other idea that's weird in some way. It doesn't fit with the other ideas immediately, or doesn't seem to, or, it's just something out of left field, or it's just something really strange. And in getting those ideas to work together, you come up with something really cool. And I think a lot of times in genre fiction, the strange attractor oftentimes turns out to be the fantastic element in your story. So, you can think of a lot of stories that are pretty mundane overall. For instance, I've been watching American Gods lately, the TV show based on the book by Neil Gaiman. And, that's an example of kind of what I'm talking about, where in general, the story is current day United States and, things are as you would expect. But then the fantastic element that's thrown into the mix is, gods are real and they walk among us in human forms. And, from that comes a lot of fantastic elements in the show or the book and a lot of magic or whatnot. but it all springs from that one kind of fantastic element of the gods are real. So you could call that kind of a strange attractor, right? Like you have this idea of just, current day United States, and we're going to tell like kind of a travelogue story set in the US, in the modern US. But then we throw in this strange element of, oh, by the way, the gods are real and walk among us. And the story is really about what they're up to. So a lot of genre stories are like that, where things are pretty normal, and then you have one or a few things that are different or out there that are some kind of magic or whatever. So a lot of times you'll have like urban fantasy or whatever, where things are pretty much like the real world, except vampires are real, or werewolves are real, or demons are real, or whatever. So that's kind of the idea of the strange attractor. I feel like you have the same kind of thing in a way in science fiction, specifically space opera, especially in things that try to be a little more realistic. For instance, The Expanse, a lot of the stuff you see in The Expanse is actually pretty realistic. There's not a lot of hand waving going on. There's not a lot of, magical space opera stuff. But then the one exception to that is their Epstein drive, which is what allows their ships to constantly accelerate at 1G, which is what allows them to travel from place to place within the solar system so quickly. And, that's something that was, I think, probably needed to make the story work, because, they wanted people to be able to get from place to place in the solar system in a matter of days instead of months or even longer. So you'll see that, I feel like, with a lot of sci-fi, where it's pretty realistic, and then there'll be one or a few things that are just these magical elements that are thrown in just to kind of make things work. So the Expanse is the best example I can think of that, where most of the things are pretty mundane sci-fi, I would call, in The Expanse. But then you have the Epstein drive, which is the one kind of major kind of fantasy element thrown in. Star Trek isn't such a great example because there are so many of those things thrown in. It's not like Star Trek is mostly realistic, and then there's a few fantastical things thrown in. It's all kinds of fantastical things, especially in like the new season of Discovery. It's even more of that. But yeah, so you see that in space opera too. This idea of the strange attractor. All right. So anyway, sorry about the strange attractor tangent there. But what I was getting at is, a lot of times I have a bunch of ideas for something, but what really makes the project take off for me is how I start putting those ideas together. And, some of those ideas might be strange attractors, which is how I got into the whole tangent. But those are the ideas that I tend to get when I'm talking to other people, is those connecting ideas, kind of the connective tissue that holds all these different ideas together. And those are kind of, for me at least, those are the Eureka moments that really tend to get me going and kind of bring everything together. And there are also these moments that seem to happen a lot when I'm discussing the thing with someone else. So that's what happened a few weeks ago with my wife. I was just talking about all these different ideas I was having about the setting, and just kind of had this Eureka moment, this kind of one idea that kind of brought everything else together in a neat little package, and I got really excited about it. So I'll be talking about that more specifically a little later. So before we get too deep into this, and before I go on to too many tangents, there are just a couple quick things about the show that I want to announce here at the beginning. First off, I think I mentioned this before, but I am soliciting from you, the listeners, questions about my setting. I'm looking for 20 questions about the setting. And my thought is that when I've collected enough of these questions, I'll do one or more episodes just answering these questions. And it can be really any question, but specifically, if you have any questions about the setting itself, specific questions, things that you've wondered about that I haven't covered or whatever, please let me know. Because the idea with this is I've talked about the setting a lot, but it's been pretty scattershot. Just I talk about things as they occur to me. and hasn't been like a comprehensive overview of the setting. So it's very likely that there are things that I haven't mentioned that are maybe important or just that you would wonder about. So, this is a way to solicit some feedback from you and hear from some of my listeners, get a feel for what kind of things you're interested in, and also should provide some good content for the show, hopefully filling in any gaps I've left about what's going on with this setting. So if you have any questions that have occurred to you while you're listening to these episodes about the setting, things you've wondered about it that I haven't covered or haven't mentioned, or just follow-ups on things I have mentioned, let me know. And those are very valuable questions to me and can help me guide topics for future episodes. So the best way to get those to me is either shoot me an email at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com or put your question in our Discord community. And you can find a link to that in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/LOL. And my second and final announcement today, which it's probably a little unnecessary if you're listening to this, but this show is no longer hosted on Spotify. I was having some technical difficulties with Spotify, and all the episodes weren't showing up on Spotify, and they didn't seem to be updating my feed. And I tried to work it out with their tech support, such as it is, and they kept insisting that the problem was with my feed. However, the show is showing up just fine on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts, so there's obviously nothing wrong with the feed. But there's only been 7 people who've downloaded or listened to any episodes on Spotify anyway. So obviously that's not where the majority of people are getting the show anyway. And I was getting nowhere with their tech support. And I've had issues like this with Spotify in the past with other shows. So I just decided just to take the show off of Spotify because it's frankly not worth the hassle for me when so few people listen to podcasts on Spotify anyway, or at least people listening to this show. So apologies to you if that inconveniences you if you were listening to the show on Spotify, but you can still get it on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or with any podcast app that you use. You should be able to just search for Lex Out Loud on your app and find it. Most, if not all of those apps use the iTunes podcast directory, which I am on iTunes, so you should find it. But if for some reason on your particular app you can't find it, at the top of the show notes for every episode is an RSS button, and that is the RSS feed link, and you can use that link to subscribe in any app. If you go look where you subscribe to new shows, there should be an option somewhere to manually subscribe using an RSS link, and you can use that link in any app, and you'll be good to go. If for some reason you can't find it, just searching for it on your app. So again, apologies if you were listening to this on Spotify, but I wasn't confident that I could get this fixed. And even if I did get it fixed, it seems like it would be an issue that would be a recurring issue that I would constantly have to be dealing with. And again, there's just not a lot of people using it. So it didn't really seem worthwhile use of my time. And the other thing is I don't want the show on Spotify or anywhere else if it's not going to be updated. Because like, for instance, when I had it taken down, there are only 8 episodes on Spotify, even though I put out 10 episodes. So the last 2 episodes weren't on there. And I don't want people to be on something like Spotify and thinking the show isn't releasing content anymore because Spotify isn't updating, and not realize that, no, there's plenty of new episodes. They're just not on Spotify. So I thought it was best to just get it off of there completely. So hopefully it's gone now. I haven't checked, but hopefully they got it off of there. All right. So enough of that stuff. Let's get back to talking about our world building, science fiction, all that good stuff. And a big part of this for me, writing a mundane science fiction, is keeping up to date on what's going on right now, because this is very much going to affect what I'm doing. Because a big part of what I'm doing right now is trying to work out a timeline to get an idea of a ballpark of how many years in the future the story takes place. And the main way I'm doing that is making a list of the technologies that will be available in my story that aren't available now, and trying to figure out how long it will take to develop those technologies. And also thinking about the space exploration and settlement that's been done that hasn't happened yet, and how long that will all take. So what's happening right now in space exploration is very important to me because it's informing that to a large degree. So I've been keeping up on, or trying to, on what's going on in space right now, even more than I normally do. It's always been a hobby of mine. And I got to tell you, this is a really exciting time. So if you're someone that's at all interested in this kind of stuff, there are a lot of really exciting things going on right now. And if you don't have a lot of time to go looking for news or things like that, feel free to follow me on Twitter at @StarWalker, or join our Discord. And I try to share things I find on Twitter as far as space news and things like that. So if you don't have a lot of time, you can keep up with some of the stuff, at least some of the stuff I'm keeping up with by following me on Twitter. And then I also post some of the stuff in Discord as well. And then we can discuss it there. So that's another great place to go too. So just in case you're not aware of the exciting things going on right now, Perseverance, rover sent by NASA, just recently landed on Mars looking for signs of life, and will be hopefully the first time that samples are brought back to Earth from Mars. ESA, the European Space Agency, has plans for a sample return mission to basically, Perseverance is collecting core samples from Mars' surface and is storing those little drop points on Mars. It poops out these little samples in vials, and then ESA is developing a rover that they will land on Mars, and it will go around and collect those samples and put it on a rocket that they'll send back to Earth. So that's really exciting stuff. The test flight of the 10th iteration of SpaceX's Starship happened this week, SN10. This time it did land successfully, which was awesome and amazing to see, but then soon after exploded. And I have not had time to look into that to find out exactly why it exploded. But there's some fantastic slow motion video footage of that in 4K resolution on YouTube that I'll have in the show notes for you, so you can check that out. It's super cool. One really fun part of this whole process for this book for me has been just these things that I've been learning that I don't know that I would have learned otherwise, and certainly wouldn't have learned now, maybe in the future. And yeah, it seems like almost every day I find some new amazing thing I didn't know about that's happening. So I saw a story on CNN this week that I'll also link in the show notes about a space hotel that's scheduled to open in 2027. So if you remember my series I did on future Earth history, going over the milestones of space settlement, orbital space hotels was a big part of that, a big part of commercializing space, which is necessary for us to really get anywhere in space. So this is really exciting stuff. It's going to be built by a company called Orbital Assembly, and I'll have the link to their website in the show notes. You can check them out. In addition to building the space hotel, which is going to be called Voyager Station, they've got some other really cool things planned as well. First of all, the space hotel Voyager Station is going to use rotational gravity. It's a wheel-shaped station or a ring-shaped station. Looks like a wagon wheel with spokes and everything. Looks really cool. They've got some great conceptual artwork for it. They're also going to be working on space construction, and they are planning to develop space solar power. And you may remember in a previous episode, I gushed quite a bit about space solar power and how I believe it is the way of the future. And not only can it solve our energy problems, but it can also solve a lot of our climate change problems as well, because it is a completely green source of energy that will have little to no environmental impact on Earth, especially compared to burning fossil fuels. And it's a more reliable source of energy than a lot of the alternative energy sources we have, like terrestrial solar power and wind power, which the main drawback of those types of energy is that they're intermittent. The sun doesn't shine all the time on Earth, and the wind doesn't blow all the time on Earth. However, in space, the sun is always shining. So you put some solar panels up in space and they can get sunlight all the time, convert that into electricity, and beam that electricity down to Earth via either microwaves or lasers. And boom, you've got a lot of electricity. So that's really exciting. And a new resource, I'll just go right ahead into my new resources that I found last week, I think it was, is a paper called The Economics of Space, an Industry Ready to Launch by Jeff Greason and James Bennett. I'll have that linked in the show note as well. It's a PDF. You can download and read it for free. It's got some beautiful art in it as well. Really, really interesting stuff. Something I wish that every person at NASA and every person of influence in the government would read, because I really believe that the guys that wrote this paper are right, and this is the way we need to go forward, which is in some ways not what the current plan is. And I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but one of the big points they make is that NASA, the SLS system, the Space Launch System, and the Orion capsule that they're developing, all that money is money that really could be much better spent elsewhere. Companies like Blue Origin and Spacex have already proven that they can develop these technologies a lot more efficiently, a lot more quickly, and for a lot less money and time than what NASA can. And the paper makes the point, among others, that the NASA should focus on their deep space explorations with their robotic missions and space probes and things like that, and leave launch to orbit to the private sector, which I totally agree with. But anyway, it's a fantastic paper. Please check it out. But yeah, one of the points they make in that paper is that, in order for us to really go forward in space, it needs to be commercialized and it needs to be turned over to the private sector. And yeah, it's just too much to go over right now. But yeah, they talk about space solar power in there. And in my setting, space solar power is going to be one of the fundamental things that allows these things to be possible that we're going to be seeing in my setting. So I remarked on the show before, I think, that I was really surprised that no one's working on this. And I was really surprised, honestly, that SpaceX isn't working on this. So it's cool that this orbital assembly company is going to be working on it, because there's a fortune to be made there. And the one of the points that was made in that Economics of Space paper I was just talking about is they said in that paper that every individual element of technology required for space solar power is already a technology that's been developed and tested and works. So it's just putting all the different pieces together in this particular way hasn't been done. But every individual element of the space solar power system has been done before. So they were saying in this paper that if we devoted the resources to it, we could have space solar power in 10 years, which I did not realize, and is one of those things that, if that's true, and especially if that happens, could drastically change the timeline for my story as I have it right now, because I have that happening a bit later than 10 years in the future from now. And there's a couple things like that. Another thing is how long it's going to be before we have space elevators on Earth is another big one, which are kind of these questions hanging over me that I need to answer, at least for myself, to decide how far in the future my story is really taking place. Because in the story, space solar power will be a thing and space elevators will be a thing. So as far as other new resources I've found recently, I also found an excellent PDF put out by NASA about their Artemis Plan, which is the new series of moon missions that NASA is planning. They're planning to put the first woman on the moon in 2024, and not just a woman. There'll be multiple people put on the moon. And unlike with the Apollo missions, where we basically went to the moon, landed, took a walk around, took some pictures, and went home, the Artemis missions plan to stay on the moon for longer periods of time. I think the first crewed, I shouldn't say manned, the first crewed mission to the moon in the Artemis program, I think they're staying a week, I think. But ultimately, they're going to be staying a few months at a time, and they're going to establish a permanent base on the south pole of the moon and start investigating harvesting resources like water and later aluminum and other things from the moon, which is really exciting. Really exciting stuff. So I found a write-up by NASA all about that program. It's a PDF, again, that's freely available. So I have that linked in the show notes as well. So I was just a minute ago, I was talking about this kind of eureka moment I had while talking about my setting with my wife. So let's go into that a little bit more. So right now, I've kind of got things narrowed down to two main ideas as far as the specific setting for the starting place of the first story. And again, in case you're new or you forgot, I'm planning not just a single novel in the setting. I'm planning to write, hopefully, a lot of books in this setting. Hopefully, I'll be writing books for the rest of my life in this setting. That's the plan, and other stories. But right now, I'm really focused on this first one. And so I've started narrowing down where specifically the first story is going to take place. And I've narrowed that down to two main ideas. I'm pretty sure which one I'm going to use, but I do like both of them. So the first idea is based on my original idea that I first had for this setting. I think it's over a decade ago now, which is a large city-sized rotating cylinder habitat in space, in orbit of Earth, connected to Earth by a space elevator. Now, just the nature of physics and materials, this thing, to be the size that I want it to be, would need to be made of graphene, which is a material that doesn't exactly exist yet. We can make it in extremely small amounts, but nothing like what we're talking here. In order to have or enable, if I could talk straight, in order to be able to make perfect graphene at the scale we're talking, which graphene is a crystal lattice of carbon atoms that's one atom thick. It's a single layer of like a web or a grid of carbon atoms. And so when I'm talking about it being perfect, what I mean is at the atomic level, each of those atoms is perfectly in that crystal shape. If you have even one atom out of place, it weakens the material. This super strength that we get from graphene, we only get that if it's perfect. It has to be perfect down to the individual atom, which means it has to basically be built atom by atom. Now, the way they're making it now are really ingenious methods that I don't completely understand, involving like different types of metal foil and getting the atoms to stick to them. But it's a very kind of roundabout, ham-fisted way to try to make this stuff. And it's not something I don't think that could really be scaled up to the levels that we're talking about. So I think in order to be able to make enough graphene to make cylinders that are kilometers in diameter out of the stuff, we would need nano construction technology to do that. We would not only need to be able to have nano construction, but we'd need to be able to mass produce things that were constructed on the nano level, which is to say molecule by molecule or atom by atom. So that's something that will have to exist for these large city-sized cylinders to be possible. So that's a big kind of limiter for my setting, for my timeline, is we've got to be far enough in the future that it's feasible that we would have nano construction on that level that we could make just huge amounts of this graphene. So this would be probably quite a ways in the future. And this is a question I need to be able to answer more specifically. How many years are we talking approximately? But I think my sense now is definitely 100 years or more, probably. Probably, definitely. I love people when people say stuff like that. But yeah, so not definitely, but it seems likely that it would be at least 100 years in the future. But that's something I need to look more into and do more to figure that out. So that's the first city, or the first idea is a city-sized cylinder habitat. And by city-sized, I'm talking a population of, say, 5 million people, or maybe as much as 10 million. So that's the first idea. The second idea is to set the story a little earlier than that, a little closer to our current time, and set it on the first rotating cylinder habitat that's built, which right now for my story, I'm thinking that first cylinder is built in orbit of the moon, is built of titanium, not graphene. So we don't need nano construction for it. And like I said, it would be in the more immediate future, possibly less than 100 years in the future. So those are the two main ideas. I'm either going to set it on this first city-sized cylinder, or I'm going to set it on the first cylinder ever, which would be a lot smaller. And if I remember my numbers right, instead of a population of 5 or 10 million, this first cylinder would have a population more like 36,000, and probably a lot less than that. That would be its maximum population. It would probably be less than that. So much smaller. So the first idea is a large city. So it would be an analog to a story told in a large modern city like New York City or something like that, where the other idea of the earlier cylinder would have more of a feeling of more of like a frontier town kind of thing. In a large city-sized cylinder with 5 million people, you'd have all kinds of people living there, just like any city, all walks of life. But on the first cylinder that was just, maybe a few tens of thousands of people, the majority of the people living there would be people working in space construction, or people working in some manner that supports the people working in space construction. But you wouldn't have as diverse a population as you would in a full city. It would be more focused as far as the vocations people had. So those are the two big main ideas that I'm kind of juggling right now as far as the first story. So right now, I just mentioned NASA's planning to put humans on the moon again in 2024. And NASA is also planning to send humans to Mars sometime in the 2030s. This does seem a little unrealistic to me. I will be very happy to be wrong by that, but right now I'd be very surprised to see humans walking on Mars in the 2030s. But what do I know, right? So if they can do that, if they can keep to this timeline and have people on Mars in the 2030s or even close to it, then my story may be happening more near in the future than I'm thinking right now. Because right now I'm thinking there aren't going to be people on Mars in the 2030s. It'll be a bit later than that. I think, I don't have my notes right on hand. I think I was thinking more like around 2050 or something. But I haven't finalized any of that yet. But but if it turns out that we are going to have people on Mars in the 2030s, then that moves things up quite a bit. I'm still also learning about space elevators because my initial core idea, like I said, was one of these huge cylinders in orbit connected to Earth by a space elevator. Because one of the ideas was that people can very easily and quickly travel from these cylinder habitats to Earth. So people can still, go hike in the mountains and stuff like that. They're not completely removed from Earth. And, if you have a cylinder in geostationary orbit, which is, I don't know, like 25,000 miles up or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. And you have it connected by a space elevator. And if you can accelerate your cable car on your space elevator at 1G, which is something I need to look into how feasible that really is. But if you can do that, then you could conceivably have a trip from the space elevator to Earth's surface take about an hour, give or take, at 1G of acceleration the whole way. And that way your passengers have Earth gravity the whole way. And the idea is you accelerate at 1G halfway there. And then the other half of the way, you are accelerating in the opposite direction or slowing down at 1G as well. And if you can do that, then you can make that trip in about an hour. So you could picnic on Earth if you live in one of these cities. So if I go with this initial idea of setting the story on this first cylinder with the space elevator, then that's my other limiting factor. The one is we need to be far enough in the future to have mass production scale nano construction. And the other limiting factor is, well, actually, I just realized it's the same limiting factor, because actually that graphene that I was talking about that you need to make the really big cylinders, you also need that to make a space elevator work on Earth, or something as strong or stronger than graphene, because the cable is so long to go all the way up into geostationary orbit, which again is like 20-some thousand miles up. It's way up there, that it needs to be strong enough that it can support its own weights at that huge length, as well as the weight of things that you're moving up and down the cable. Because the whole point of the space elevator is to be able to move things from the surface of Earth, equipment and people and water, whatever you want, up into geostationary orbit and everywhere in between very, very cheaply, instead of having to use rockets and be a slave to the rocket equation. So that's the appeal of a space elevator, is it's more along the cost of running a cable car than having a rocket. And the big reason for that is when a rocket is going into orbit, not only does the rocket have to have enough thrust to lift the people and the equipment and everything else that you're taking into orbit, it also has to lift all of the fuel to take it up into orbit. And if it's a reusable rocket, it also needs to lift fuel to get it back down to the surface of Earth. So that's a lot of added weight. And that's what people are referring to when you hear them talk about the rocket equation, because as you add weight to the rocket, then you need more thrust to lift that weight, which means you need more fuel, which means you have more weight, which means you need more thrust in it, and it just keeps going. So the appeal of a space elevator is it runs on electricity, and the electricity is delivered through the cable that the car is going up. So the car doesn't have to carry any fuel of any kind. And also that electricity is coming from solar panels that are up in space and get sunlight 24/7. So from an energy and a cost perspective, once it's built and once you've paid for building it, a space elevator is way, 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 way cheaper than a rocket, because it doesn't have to lift the fuel as well as the payload. It just lifts the payload. So that's why space elevators are awesome. But due to the strength of Earth's gravity and the fact that the cable, whatever material that's made of, has to be able to support its own weight plus the weight of whatever it's carrying at such a huge length, that's why we need this super material called graphene to make it work. Now, we can build them on the moon and Mars right now using Kevlar, because they have weaker gravity and Kevlar is strong enough to handle it. But here on Earth, Kevlar isn't strong enough. So it's really the same limiting factor. My story needs to be far enough in the future that we have mass scale nano construction, so we can make massive amounts of perfect graphene for our space elevator cables and for our habitats. The other nice thing about going that far in the future is that by then we should have efficient fusion power as well, which makes isn't really needed for the stuff I want to do on Earth and Mars and the moon and stuff like that. But fusion power is kind of required if you're going to have settlements farther out in the solar system, because as you go into the outer solar system, the sunlight is so weak out there that there comes a point where solar power isn't going to generate enough electricity for you, and you'll need fusion to power your settlements and stuff once you get far enough out. So it's kind of a given, I think, that at least in my opinion, that we'll have fusion long before we have nano construction on a large scale. Just the way things are going, that just seems to be a pretty safe bet. So as I said, I'm still learning about space elevators. And I read some stuff just the other week. I'm putting, space elevators and these huge cylinders at least 100 years out. I haven't dialed it in closer than that yet. I'm still working on it, but I think even 100 years, it would be pretty optimistic to think we'd have nano construction on that scale by then and would have the resources to build these things, because they'd be huge, huge projects to build. And it's just going to take time. And I don't think it's wise for me to assume the shortest amount of time either, because these things always seem to take longer than we think they will. So I'm planning to add quite a bit of buffer to allow for, there to be hangups and things that take longer than we think they will. And, we don't necessarily do things the fastest, most efficient way. And we don't necessarily get where we're going the most quickest possible. I mean, look how long we've spent kicking our heels between the last time we landed people on the moon and now. Decades have gone by where, as far as exploring the moon, very little has happened, at least as far as having humans there. So you never know, how long these things will take. So I think it's smart to add in some extra time for some padding, because it's highly unlikely that these things will happen at the quickest possible rate. Although there's always the possibility of some new development coming along that makes things suddenly much sooner than you think they would be. So as I said, I was reading about space elevators recently and read some things, and it sounds like at least some people think the space elevators might happen a lot sooner than I was thinking. So this is something I need to learn more about. And as I was researching that, something really cool I discovered. There's actually, there's more than one, but there's an international group of people passionate about space elevators and who are furthering research into space elevators. And this particular group, there's actually, I think, 3 groups in the world. There's one in Japan, I believe. And then there's another, I think it was somewhere in Europe. And then this third group, the International Space Elevator Consortium, has their annual conference in Seattle, which is like an hour and a half from where I live. So I'm going to go this year, hopefully, assuming the general public can go, and assuming it's still happening with the pandemic and everything. Hopefully, at least they'll do it virtually online. But yeah, that's where, people that are working on this gather and share their ideas. So if I don't have a good sense of when's the earliest possible date we could have space elevators before that conference, hopefully I will after it. And I think that's in May. It's coming up soon. So like I said, right now I'm leaning more toward the idea of setting the story on this first city-sized graphene cylinder at the top of a space elevator. And that was my original idea, the original conception that launched all this years ago. However, I also do like the idea of telling a story about this first cylinder built, kind of more of a frontier town vibe, which would be, again, a much smaller cylinder, probably made of titanium or maybe steel and aluminum. There's also aluminum on the moon. And stuff I've been reading lately, they've been talking a lot about, like in the Artemis program, they mentioned aluminum quite a bit and looking into refining aluminum from material on the moon. And I haven't heard titanium mentioned, so I want to look into that as well. It seems maybe that it would be a lot easier to refine aluminum from materials on the moon than titanium. I'm not sure why titanium hasn't been mentioned, but that's something I want to look into. So yeah, I'm thinking this first cylinder would be in lunar orbit, which also is something else I may rethink. One of my thoughts behind that was, I mean, these things are huge. This first cylinder, I'm trying to remember how big did I say it was? You know what? Let me turn on my other monitor here. I have my notebook open on other monitor. Let's see. See, I've got so much stuff I can't remember it all anymore. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So this first cylinder that I was thinking would be in orbit of the moon is 1 kilometer in radius. So it's 2 kilometers in diameter and 1 kilometer high. So it's huge. So my thought was that people might be a little leery about putting something like that in orbit of Earth. You've always got people who are ignorant. I mean, that's the word for it. They're ignorant. They're not educated about these things. They don't understand how they work. And so they'll be afraid of things that there's really no reason to be afraid of, but they don't know any better, right? And in the early days of this kind of stuff, that's going to be a lot of people. It's going to be most of the people aren't going to understand, orbital mechanics or anything like that. So I could see, your average everyday person being very fearful of having this, 2-kilometer diameter, 1 kilometer high structure hanging above Earth that, well, what if it falls down someday, right? So that was one thought. And then the other thought was that, well, at this point, most, if not all of the material to build this thing will actually be coming from the moon and possibly some near Earth asteroids. So it'd actually probably be easier for them to build it in orbit of the moon because they'd have to ship stuff less far that's coming from the moon to build it. And it would just probably be easier to not have people object to it in orbit of the moon because you don't have people afraid that it's going to fall down on their heads. Now, once these things are around for a few generations and people get used to them, then, they'll get past that and they'll start building them around Earth. So that was my original thought. But, I just told you a little bit ago about Voyager Station, which this thing's going to supposedly be built in 2027. And I'm not aware of any huge outcry about that. I mean, it's not going to be 2 kilometers in diameter, I don't think, but it's still big enough that, I don't know. I could see people being afraid of, oh, what if that thing falls down? Of course, you don't really hear that with the International Space Station. So I don't know. Maybe that's not a thing. Maybe that won't be a thing. But that's kind of what I was thinking. But it's like within a few years, if people are going to be building these large structures in low Earth orbit, then, maybe that isn't a good reason, at least, that they would build the first cylinder in orbit of the moon. Maybe people not wanting it in orbit of Earth wouldn't even be a thing. However, I do still think that my point of it being closer to the source materials would be valid. It does in a way make sense that it would be built there. So yeah, it's something I still need to think about a bit. But the other reason I was having it built on the moon was I was thinking about, okay, we're going to go to the moon. We're going to start mining and refining materials from the moon that we're going to use to build things in space. We need to get those things from the surface of the moon up into space, up in the lunar orbit and elsewhere where we can use it. How would they do that? And my first thought was they would use a mass driver. That's what a lot of people think would be done. And that's the way I was going. And I'm still going that way. They are going to use one in the very beginning. But then I remembered that, we can build a space elevator on the moon using Kevlar. So then it occurred to me that, well, since the space elevator is such a fundamental part of my setting, like there's really two fundamental elements, the space elevator and the cylinder habitat. Those are the two things that, at least to me, make my setting my setting. They're kind of the keystones of my setting. And since I know that, if I imagine a world where maybe that's on the agenda, maybe they know way ahead of time that they want to do that someday. Maybe they, we're already making some graphene now. So maybe in the near future, they're able to make perfect graphene and they're able to make enough of it that they're making things out of it, but small things like, bicycles and cars and things like that. They're not to the point where they can make, kilometer sized habitats out of it yet, but they can see that on the horizon that one day they'll get to the point where they can mass produce this stuff. And maybe they start planning, these huge cylinder cities really early. And if that's the case, then it would really make sense for them to build a space elevator on the moon with Kevlar, because they can do that now. and for them to build a small cylinder, quote, small, a 2 kilometer diameter small cylinder out of titanium or steel or whatever atop that space elevator on the moon as a proof of concept, a pilot program for the bigger ones they plan to build on the future on Earth. And also they could build them on Mars. When they got to Mars, they could build a space elevator there. So that made a lot of sense to me. And then that is a way, if they have multiple space elevators on the moon, that is a nice cheap way that they can get lots of material that they've refined on the surface of the moon up into lunar orbit and from there to Earth orbit or wherever they want to go. So, in that regard, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'll probably stick with that. But these are things I think about. So like I said, I have these kind of two ideas. I'm kind of going back and forth, either the larger city cylinder on Earth with a space elevator, which would be farther in the future, or a smaller cylinder on the moon with a space elevator, which would be sooner in the future. I may not make a final decision between those two ideas until I start coming up with some more solid character and plot ideas. Right now, I'm thinking that I'll probably go with the big cylinder city because, again, that was the original idea. But I could see telling a story about the first cylinder on the moon could be like a cool kind of prequel story that I could write later. And it would be really cool if I did that, if these prequel stories could involve either younger versions of the characters in the main story or perhaps ancestors of the characters of the main story, depending how much time I decide takes place between when they build this first cylinder on the moon and when they have them around Earth. It could be a short enough period of time that I could have a character who in the main books is an adult, like maybe middle-aged, and in the prequels could be a young adult. That would be fun. Or if I decided it's more time than that, then maybe, in the prequels, we're reading about one of the main characters' parents or grandparents or something like that. That could be kind of fun and a way to kind of tie it in more to the main story so it seems more relevant and less like a just random prequel kind of thing. But that's kind of what I'm thinking now, because a lot of my ideas are around the city idea. But I do think telling a story about a smaller, more intimate cylinder, intimate at 36,000 people, but you know what I mean, would be cool too. But yeah, that'd be a fun little kind of side project to do it at some point in the setting. So let's get to the Eureka moment. I've been teasing this whole episode that I had, and I mean, this isn't like an earth-shattering realization or anything, but to me, it was kind of the piece that brought the puzzle together, that it was kind of like the hub of the wheel that everything else kind of connects to. So, I had the thought that this first city-sized cylinder that's built is so big, and it's on such a level beyond anything that had been done before that. And also the space elevator as part of it. Each of those things would be huge undertakings, bigger than humanity has ever done. And you're putting them both together. So it makes sense to me that, like a lot of the things we're doing in space now, like the International Space Station and like the Lunar Gateway Station, that at least this first cylinder that's built, the first city-sized one, that it would not be built by a single nation, but instead would be built as a cooperative effort of a group of nations. And again, just because I didn't tell you, so I said the first cylinder on the moon was 2 kilometers in diameter. The first city-sized one, which I'm thinking would hold a population of up to around 5 million people, we're talking 22 kilometers in diameter. So more than 10 times as big. So it's a huge scale up from what they built at that before that. So yeah, it makes most sense to me that we'd have a cooperation between nations to build it, because it would be such a huge undertaking and so expensive and everything else. And just because it's a continuation of what we're seeing now with the International Space Station and with the Gateway Station, which, the Gateway is mainly being built by NASA, but ESA is helping out, and the Canadian Space Agency is helping out. JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, is helping out. And I guess Roscosmos, I think is how you say that, the Russian Space Agency, has expressed interest as well. So, that's already how we're doing things. And I think in the future, it will be more and more like that it will be more and more a thing of cooperation. And, it seems like, at least for the most part, the spacefaring nations, that's what we're wanting to do right now. So hopefully that will be even more so in the future. So my thought is that this first city-sized cylinder is a cooperative effort by all the spacefaring nations working together. They've formed some kind of an alliance. It's probably I don't know if it'd be like a subset of the UN or affiliated with the UN, like NATO or something like that. But it's probably somehow affiliated with the UN. Of course, the UN is going to involve many more nations than just those that have the capability to go to space. So the Space Alliance is just going to be formed of these nations who have the capability to cooperate in building this space elevator and this cylinder. Since these things need to be in geostationary orbit, they need to be over the equator. A lot of the equator is actually ocean and is international waters. So since this is going to be a city built by a cooperation of various nations, I think it makes sense that it would be built in international waters so that no one, it's not built over the United States, for instance. It's out in no man's land, so to speak. So yeah, that's not really a new idea. I've been kind of thinking that it would be something like that to begin with. But I guess kind of the Eureka idea, or the idea that just kind of brought everything together for me, was I suddenly had this thought of, let's say we have, I'm thinking at this point, at least 5 nations would be involved with this, probably more. I'm working on what specifically those nations would be right now. Or I shouldn't say 5 nations, I should say 5 space agencies. Because, for instance, you have ESA, the European Space Agency, represents numerous countries. It's not just one country. But 5 space agencies at least would be cooperating in this, probably more. So the really cool idea I had that I instantly fell in love with is, the cylinder would be, in a lot of ways, would be a melting pot of cultures, right? Let's just say we have 10 nations. I'll just grab a number. Let's say we have 10 different nations. We've got the United States, we've got Canada, we've got various European nations that are part of ESA. We've got Japan. We've got, I think the UAE, the United Arab Emirates would be definitely be part of this by then. I'm still researching the various space programs out there and where they're at, and trying to figure out who would be at the point by then to be part of this. I think possibly, hopefully, China and Russia would be part of this. And as long as it's far enough in the future that I think it's feasible, that's what I'm going to do. Because part of what I'm wanting to do with this is to show a hopeful view of the future. So, having Russia and China be part of this is part of that. Of, in the future, we've resolved our differences, and they've joined us as part of this cooperative effort instead of kind of doing their own thing. And then, yeah, some other countries that right now their space programs are developing, but that I decide by then would have developed enough. So let's say we've got 10 nations, just to grab a number out of the air, that are involved with this. So, it's kind of, in a way, taking something that I love about Star Trek and dialing it up a bit more. Because, the original Star Trek on the Enterprise, we kind of had this idea of multinationalism or cooperation, because we had Sulu, who was some kind of Asian descent. I'm not sure exactly what his ethnicity was supposed to be exactly. Sorry about that. We had Scotty from Scotland. Obviously, we had Chekhov from Russia. Kirk was from North America, from Iowa, I think. So we had this idea that, when Starfleet was definitely made up of a united Earth from people from all over the globe. It wasn't just an American thing or whatever. But I mean, it was really just there in those characters, like you had Sulu, you had Chekhov, you had Scotty, Picard was supposedly French, even though he seemed far more British than French in a lot of ways, but he was supposed to be French. But that was really it. Like you saw it in the characters, but that was really the only way you saw that. Where what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to show that culturally, because I'm I went to school for anthropology. I part of me will always be an anthropologist, and that's what I really started thinking about. I'm like, okay, imagine we have this huge cylinder, 5 million people living in it, but these are 5 million people coming from 10 specific nations, and each of these nations has their own culture, their own language, and everything else, right? Their own history. And, I don't want to show this like generic culture like what we have in Star Trek, where, on the quote culture of the Enterprise in the original show, I don't remember seeing any Asian influences or any Russian influences or any Scottish influences other than Scotty drinking Scotch whiskey. The quote culture of the ship, such as it was, seemed very homogenized, seemed like everybody was the same. I don't think that's super realistic, at least not that close in the future. So the idea that I had, I know I keep beating around the bush. The idea that I had for this cylinder city that I fell in love with was all of these nations, all 10 of these, and 10 is just a random number, but all 10 of these nations are involved in this thing from square one. So they're involved with the planning of the cylinder long before it's built. And one of the cool things about these cylinders is they're very, even though, you could build 100 cylinders with the same dimensions, the same physical characteristics, they could be very, very different on the inside as far as how you lay them out, how many cylinders you have nested within the main cylinder, and what gravities those are at. So you could have 2 cylinders that look exactly the same from the outside, but on the inside would be completely different. Just like, if you go to Tokyo, it's going to look very different than New York in a lot of ways, although in some ways they'll look the same, right? But there'll be a lot of differences due to their different cultures. So my idea that I had, that I instantly fell in love with, was each of these 10 nations is involved from the beginning. And basically, they're each given a district or a slice of this cylinder pie, and they're given a lot of latitude for the design of their own district. So Russia, for instance, is given an area of the cylinder that's their area, which is not to say that other people can't go there. But what I mean by that is Russians design the Russian part of the cylinder as far as the, what do the quote houses look like? What's the architecture, the interior architecture look like? What colors are things? How are things decorated? All of that. So, fast forward to when the thing is finished and people are living on it, you'll have different districts in the cylinder in the city devoted to each of the nations that cooperated to build it. So you'll have a Japanese district and a Russian district and an American district and a Canadian district, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just like kind of, in American cities, you have like an area where there's a lot of Greek immigrants, and an area where there's a lot of Chinese immigrants, and an area where there's a lot of Italian immigrants, and things like that. Like that, but even more so, because again, these countries design everything in that area from the ground up. So if you're in the German district, you're going to see, the architecture is going to be reminiscent of German architecture. Of course, it's a habitat in space, So the materials will be different and things like that. But they can still, one of the ideas with these is you want to make it as Earth-like as possible, especially in the early days when you're enticing people to move there from Earth. You make it as Earth-like as possible. And the only ways you make it different from living on Earth are ways that are seen as improvements on living on Earth. And I'm just going to have a ball with this as an anthropologist, because what I want to do is once I determine what the 10 nations or whatever the number is, are what they are, who those nations are, then I want to research each of their cultures so I can bring in those elements. So if we're in the German district in the story, I can describe, how the architecture and the food and the music and maybe even what people are wearing are different there than in other parts of the city. And so, for instance, in your German district, you have a lot of German restaurants, of course, which will be awesome for people living there because there'll be so much variety, right? Like every night you could go to a different part of the city and have very different food from a very different part of the earth. The other part of this is each of these sections will also grow their own food. So in the German section, people will be growing different crops than they're growing in the Chinese section, who are growing different crops than they're growing in the Canadian section. So yeah, it's not like everybody's going to be growing the same 5 things. They're going to be different in different areas. And so, you could go to the Greek section and have authentic Greek food, grown from authentic Greek crops or whatever. So that's the kind of the Eureka moment of this melting pot city with discrete districts that are kind of devoted to each of the nations that build it and were designed by those nations. So you'll see different architecture. There'll be different kinds of food grown. Part of this is they're going to have huge like hydroponic fields and vertical levels of fields on top of fields on top of fields, everything hydroponic, where they're growing, like your grains and things like that. But they're also going to have a lot of like herbs and fruit trees just, around where people are, just to bring greenery into just day-to-day life. So you'll have different fruit trees growing in the different districts based on what kind of fruits they grow in their homelands. So I think that'll be really fun and cool. And it'll be fun for me as an anthropologist to get to research all these different cultures and decide what kind of cultural elements I can bring into the story to make those different parts of the city come to life. So, those can be things like architecture, interior design, music, food, clothing, the holidays they celebrate, the festivals they have, all those kinds of things would be very different in the different districts of the city. And I think it'd be super cool. And then out of that, because my idea isn't that people would be just super segregated. Not at all. Again, each country gets a chunk of the cylinder that they get to design. But when people move there and, if you're going to go buy an apartment on the cylinder and live there, you can live wherever you want. If you're Chinese, you don't have to live in the Chinese district. You can live wherever you want. And, everybody will speak a common language in addition to their native tongues if they're different. And I suppose that'll be English, just because that's probably what it will be. And also because I'm an American writer writing in English, so it's just the easiest thing to do. But, they'll speak their own languages too, so, like you see today, if you go to Germany, you'll see signs in German and English. Will be the same kind of thing. You go to the German part of the cylinder, you'll see signs in German and English. But people will be free to live everywhere or live anywhere they want, and people will work together. So the segregation is more a thing of design of the cylinder and to give different areas of the cylinder very different personalities. But it's not a thing that will really be among the people, if that makes sense, because everybody's going to be working together. So I think it'll be really cool. It'll be like the Epcot Center, if you've ever been there, where they have all these different cultures kind of represented in one place, all kind of blending together. it'll be kind of like that. And then, your areas, your administrative areas that aren't necessarily devoted to one specific culture would hopefully show elements of all of them together. So not only would you have all these different, say, 10 cultures represented, but then you'd have the kind of meta culture that develops that's unique to that cylinder, that's a result of all these different people living and working together and all these cultural elements mixing together. What is it called? Cultural diffusion in anthropology. So you have this happen on Earth where you have two neighboring cultures that trade and communicate with one another, and you'll see cultural diffusion, which is elements of one culture going over to the other culture. But you'd see it even more in a cylinder like this, where you have so many cultures in such a small area cooperating together. I just think it's a beautiful idea, and it's taken the idea, that I think Star Trek popularized. I don't know that they were the first ones to do it or anything, but they're definitely the ones that brought the idea to the popular consciousness of people in the future working together and crossing those national boundaries and blurring them in a large way. And I think this is taking that to the next level. And also without things becoming homogenized, because that's one criticism I do have of how this has been shown a lot of times in Star Trek, is it's like, yeah, people came from all over the world, but then when they're in the Federation or they're in Starfleet, they get kind of homogenized and they seem to lose a lot of those things that make them different, and they all kind of seem the same. And I don't think that's super realistic, and it's definitely not something to aspire to, I don't think. I think a more laudable goal is what I want to show with the Cylinder City, where, yes, we have all these different people working together for a common cause, but they don't have to give up what makes them unique to do that. They can hold on to their own languages and their own cultures and learn to appreciate and respect the differences, instead of everybody trying to be the same and try to come to some homogenous agreement of what we all are. There is that overarching, we are all citizens of this cylinder, and we have a unity in that sense. And like I said, they will have their own metaculture that evolves out of that. But it's not going to require them to give up what makes them individual cultures. They'll be encouraged to keep those and to nurture those and to continue to develop those. And then this metaculture will evolve from that. And I just think it's a beautiful idea. And also, I think it's something that I'm uniquely suited to do. And I think in anything you're doing where there's, for lack of a better term, competition, there's a lot of sci-fi out there you can read, right? So my book is going to be competing with all the other books you could read. So, it's always good to have something that sets you apart, something that you can do, or you can do in a different way that no one else is doing quite like that. And, I imagine there aren't a lot of anthropologists writing science fiction. There are probably a lot of astrophysicists writing science fiction and astronomers and things like that. But not so much anthropologists, I don't think. So, that might be something that I can bring to the table that's a little different than what people are used to, is, bringing in those cultural elements. And I'm looking forward to it, honestly. I'm looking forward to when I decide what these nationalities will be. I'm looking forward to researching all those cultures as much as I look forward to researching space habitats and space exploration and stuff like that. It's another love of mine. And, I'll get to learn more about Chinese culture and Canadian culture and Japanese culture and Russian culture, which, my God, I know nothing about Russian culture. I know a bit about Japanese and Chinese culture. I studied those in college and on my own, but Russian, I know nothing. Everything I learned about that will be new. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. I think it will be a lot of fun. And if I can pull this off the way I want to, if I can do it well, I think it will be a really beautiful and inspiring view of what we could do in the future. And just this demonstration of different people working together and able to keep their differences, because I don't know. I feel like lately there's this idea that, I don't know, different people can work together, but they have to like become the same to do so. And I don't think that's it at all. I think the real beauty is when different people can work together and maintain those differences, and everyone is allowed to be the way they are. And you're able to see the beauty in the differences instead of seeing that as a problem that needs to be fixed, if that makes sense. So yeah, that really just kind of lit a fire under this whole thing when I came up with that idea. And I'm really excited about it. This kind of melting pot idea of this cylinder city. So yeah, so this city is going to be in geostationary orbit above the equator, somewhere over the ocean, over international waters, with a space elevator going down. And then the space elevator will be anchored on an artificial island in the ocean that will have resorts and things like that. And that will be multicultural as well. All right. So here to just kind of wrap things up at the end, I'll just talk a little bit about kind of what I'm working on, kind of my to-do list right now. So like I said before, I need to finish up my timeline, get that dialed in so I know how far in the future I'm at. And really, I have two big questions here, which are really one big question, which is how long is it going to be before we can have a space elevator on Earth? Which is to say, how long until we have that mass nano construction of graphene? And also, how long will it take to build these various cylinders? Because at this point, the city or in the story, they've built quite a few of them. So that could be a limiting factor too of how long does it take to build one? Of course, they can build more than one at the same time. But those are two big questions to answer. I want to research into countries that have space agencies and countries that are developing them, and decide which ones will be involved in building this first city-sized cylinder. And then once I have those, I can start researching all those cultures and finding cool elements that I can highlight in the story. And yeah, I think, in the beginning, these first city-sized cylinders will be like this, will be built by numerous nations working together. But, as the technology develops and as they build more and more of them, it'll probably get to the point where individual nations can build their own cylinders, and even groups could build their own cylinders, things like that. And I think the potential benefits of building one of these cylinders, especially this first one that's built, are so great that I think that any nation that could participate would want to. And I think that nations that couldn't participate because their space programs weren't developed enough yet would be very motivated to get to where they can participate as soon as possible. So I think it would actually incentivize space agencies to progress even more and even more quickly so that they can get on board with this new thing that's happening. So I think, for sure this would involve NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, ESA, the European Space Agency, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, the Space Agency of the United Arab Emirates, which I forget what it's called right now. Also probably, hopefully, Russia, China, and India. And then also, I want to look into, like I said, those countries that aren't as far along now, but would be by then. But right there, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 countries plus however many are involved in ESA, which I don't know off the top of my head, but it's at least a few. So yeah, we're north of 10 countries right there, easy. Probably more, because like I said, I want to add some more. I want to add at least one group from like South America and at least one from Africa. But yeah, I need to do some more research on that. Which, by the way, I did find a great page on Wikipedia that lists all the countries that have space agencies and talks about them and kind of how far along they are. And I'll have that in the show notes as well if you want to check that out. And then, research those cultures and come up with cultural elements I may want to include, things like food, clothing, music, holidays, architecture, things like that. And then finally, come up with a name for the city. My first idea I had way long ago was that these cities would be built above and replace Earth cities. I've since scrapped that idea. And, I was then thinking that it would be named after the city it replaced. But now I realize it's not very realistic that they would replace cities that exist on Earth. It's not like everybody's just going to wake up one day and decide to leave Earth. You're always going to have probably people that live on Earth, at least for a long time. So, originally I thought that everybody would be living in these cities and no one would live on Earth anymore. But I've since realized that that's not realistic. The only way you could get that to happen in the near future is if you forcibly remove people from Earth. And hopefully that wouldn't happen. And I also learned that it's easiest to put these orbital cities above the equator, not so much just wherever you want above Earth. If you want the space elevator there, because they have to be in geostationary orbit, which can only be done above the equator. There are ways you could put them above other places, but they're more involved from an engineering perspective. So at least in the beginning, I think they'd all be above the equator. And so that was a darling I had to kill. I've talked before, I think, on the show about killing your darlings, which are, these ideas that you have early on when you're writing the book that later, for whatever reason, have to go for the good of the story. And my idea of New York, that was, I for the longest time, I thought the story would take place in New York, that I'd have this cylinder above where New York City used to be, and New York City is now abandoned, and everybody lives in the cylinder above it. And for quite a few reasons, that's not going to work. And that was a darling I had to kill. So, you do what you got to do. But honestly, I think my new ideas for the city are way, way cooler than that anyway. So I'm very excited about where things are going. And finally, I want to think about how many of these big city-sized cylinders are there at this point, and what they are, what the names of them are, and their relationships with one another, and things like that. So there I am. This went kind of long. Hopefully I'll be able to shorten it somewhat in the editing, but hopefully it's not too long. But that's where I'm at on starting to zero in on this specific cylinder city, where this takes place. Right now, for just a placeholder title, I'm calling it Cylinder City 1. I really hope that's not the name of it. Surely I can come up with something better, but it just helps to have a label for things. So that's what I'm calling it right now, but that will not be the final name. We'll come up with something better. So that's it. That's today's episode. I better stop before this gets ridiculously long. If you would like to get a hold of me, I would like to hear from you. If you have questions you'd like to submit for my 20 questions about the setting, or if you just have any comments or questions about anything I've talked about on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker. You can also join our Discord server and talk to us there. You can find links to that in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/LOL. I also have a voicemail you can call if you'd like to call and leave me a message, and then I can possibly use that on the show. That number is 951-465-5391. You can find a lot of links to things I talked about today, as well as links to contact me, to support the show if you'd like to do that, all in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope it wasn't too rambly for you, but I just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed on where I'm at. I'm getting towards the end of the world building. I actually have a list on my whiteboard right now of questions I need to answer, which I pretty much covered today. And once those are answered and I research those cultures, I think the lion's share of the world building is done. Definitely enough will be done that I can start writing and I can start thinking about my characters and the plot and the story I'm actually going to tell in this amazing setting that I've been creating. So yeah, I'm excited about that, and honestly, I'm ready. I'm getting to the point where I feel like maybe if I world build much longer, it will be too long, and I'm definitely getting anxious, or not anxious, impatient. I think that's the word. I'm getting impatient to just start writing the story and just start running with this. So yeah, hopefully that will be very soon. So yeah, I don't know. We might be wrapping up the world building part of this show fairly soon. So if you have any world building topics or questions that haven't been addressed that you'd like to hear about, this is probably a good time because, I mean, not to say that we won't ever come back to world building because it's something that never really ends, but we may be shifting our focus away from world building and onto other things in the near future. So definitely, if there's any world building topics you want to hear about, let me know now rather than later. So yeah, thanks so much for your attention and your time today. And I hope you enjoy hearing about this stuff as much as I enjoy talking about it. Hope to see you in the Discord, and hope to hear from you. Hope to get some questions and feedback from you for future episodes. And yeah, until then, keep on keeping on and keep writing.